Hi everyone, our group is presenting the second half of the Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. Our group members are me, Sierra Smith, Elizabeth Thompson, Harrison Owings, Madison P., and Abby Smith. So the first chapter that we had was chapter 17. It was called Dance, Dance, Dance. This chapter was mainly kind of about how his friends finally found out that he was poor. So Junior has been traveling from Reardon and Welpinit, so he kind of feels like he's half white and half Indian. He used a quote in the chapter that said, "It was like being Indian was my job, but it was only a part-time job and it didn't pay well at all." He talked about how his family was poor, but he kind of hid it from his friends all along because he didn't want them to know because he thought that they would treat him differently. But even though his family's poor, his mom and dad always worked hard to scrape up enough money to provide him with what he needs, like food and clothes. So he's just kind of constantly been lying to the people of Reardon about how poor he is. The main part of the chapter, I would say, was when Junior took Penelope to the winter formal. He only had $5 to spend for the whole night, and there's a lot of expenses that would be that night, like buying a tux and paying for dinner and the photographs and all of that stuff. So he ended up getting through the whole night by just kind of making excuses, and he borrowed a tux from his dad, and they kind of avoided the pictures until the very end. So the night seemed to go perfect until after the dance was over. A bunch of upperclassmen and Roger, who was their friend, he asked them to go eat pancakes at the diner. So they both really wanted to go, so they did. And the whole time, Junior was super nervous about how he was going to pay for everything. But he ended up buying a bunch of food because he didn't want people to notice, so his bill was going to be really expensive. And he ended up getting so sick because of how nervous he was about paying the bill that he went to the bathroom and he was throwing up. And at that time, Roger came in to the bathroom, and he was asking him what's up, and he was just being really kind about everything. And Junior ended up telling him that he feels sick because he forgot his wallet. And Roger was like, "No problem," so he gave him $40, and that was just a really nice thing to do. And Penelope, after, kind of goes and talks to Junior, and she just said, "Are you poor?" And they all kind of realized it, and Roger was the one who first realized it. And he admits that he is poor, and he thinks that it's going to be really bad and no one's going to accept him. But then, at the end, everyone does accept him. Penelope just gives him a kiss and says that she still likes him, and then so Junior ends up realizing that it's important to let people into his life because they all end up being helpful, and they were all really amazing to him. Chapter 18 was about said don't trust your computer. So Rowdy and Junior had been exchanging emails since Junior's been going to a different school, and Rowdy ended up sending him a picture of his bare butt. This made Junior depressed because he realized that no one from Reardon was that, and he quoted, "crazy, funny, disgusting." He called Reardon kids repressed middle-aged business dudes with cell phones stuck in their small intestines. And then one of the guys at his school named Gordy, he saw the picture of Rowdy's butt and he asked him about it. And Junior just said that Rowdy now hates him since he left the reservation. And they kind of just started to talk about how things change once you move, and Junior said that some Indians think you become white if you try to make your life better. And Gordon responds, "If that were true, then wouldn't all white people be successful?" And Gordon starts to talk about his life and his problems too, and he says that the white people at home call him an apple because they think he's red on the outside and white on the inside.
Hi, my name is Madison, and I had chapters 19 through 21. So in chapter 19, Mary writes Junior by hand instead of the other way. So this time is the first time she writes him by hand. So he gets a letter in the mail. And her letter talks about how she's having a hard time getting a job because she is applying at restaurants who won't hire her because she doesn't have any experience, which is kind of a typical complaint, and it's really it is hard to get a job when you don't have any experience, but how are you supposed to get experience if no one will hire you? But she's started writing her life story in her free time, and her husband have moved into a trailer, and she likes it a lot, so she's really excited about moving into this trailer. However, Junior isn't so much as excited about the trailer as Mary is. So a lot happens in chapter 20. The chapter title is Reindeer Games. And in this chapter, Junior's dad tells Junior how he met Junior's mom. His mom is 8 years older than his dad, and when they were kids, he tells a story about how his dad used to help her get a drink from the water fountain. Junior's dad tells Junior the story because he wants to motivate him to try out for the basketball team. So Junior ends up trying out for the basketball team. He goes to tryouts, and he's told that 16 of the 40 kids won't make the team. And it's a very vigorous tryout. The kids run 100 laps. 4 of the kids give up, and then they play one-on-one. Junior matches up against Roger, and they kind of have this little feud. Roger is a lot taller than Junior, and he dunks on him. And then Roger, he dunks multiple times on him. And Coach asks Junior, when Junior is a little not so happy, a little down on himself, he asks Junior if he wants to take a break. And Junior has this internal struggle where he wants to give up, but he still wants to make the team, so he doesn't. And so Junior eventually makes the team. And then, after he doesn't give up on himself. And then the next week, the basketball team goes to Wellpinit, and this is kind of a struggle for Junior because it's where his old team, or it's where he used to go to school. And all of the fans are cheering against him and cheering that he sucks. And they are calling him Arnold instead of Junior because they are using his white name, I guess, if you would say that. Actually, Rowdy kind of redeems himself here, and he's the only person who doesn't turn his back on Junior at this time. Junior's put in the first quarter. A fan hits Junior in the head with a quarter as he's running onto the court, and he has to leave the game because he's bleeding. Eugene, the EMT, comes in to take a look at him, and he decides that he might need stitches, so he does stitch him up in the locker room. Junior goes into the game early in the second half after the stitches, and when he goes up for a layup, Rowdy elbows him in the head, and he eventually needs to leave because they think that he might have a concussion, and so they take him to the hospital. Okay, so the last chapter that I had was chapter 21, which is A Partridge in a Pear Tree. And this chapter is about Christmas at Junior's house. It's one of the sadder chapters. During Christmas, Junior's family doesn't have enough money to buy presents. And Junior's dad is kind of upset, and he leaves and goes on this huge drinking spree. He leaves on Christmas Eve and doesn't come back until January 2nd, and he has a terrible hangover, and that's how Junior knows that he's been drinking. And Junior's dad feels bad and apologizes to him about not having anything for Christmas. Junior says it's okay, but it's not really okay. And Junior's dad tells Junior to look in his boot, and Junior finds $5 from his dad. And Junior's really proud of him because he thinks about how he could have spent that money on more booze, but instead he gives that money to Junior, and he calls it, quote, a beautiful ugly thing.
In chapter 22, Red versus White, Junior's sister keeps sending him postcards about Montana, and she's talking about her New Year's resolution to finish her book. The main theme around her book is hope, and Junior's been thinking about that, and he thinks about his love for his family and all the sacrifices they made with him going to Reardon. And within that, Junior has been um, thinking a lot about how his dad, even though he's an alcoholic, has never missed a single one of his games, and that they're always there for that. And he starts comparing his family with families of white people that go to Reardon, as in, even though he's always seen his family there for all of his things, even on the reservation as well, that's just how they are in their culture. At Reardon, he's never seen some of the parents there, that they never even show up. And there's even specific spots where he mentions that, a dad could disappear while even just staying in the room, just because they're just so quiet and kind of not involved in what's going on. And so while he's comparing all that and stuff, he takes the time and realizes he's very grateful for what he's seen and what his family's doing for him. And then as the chapter goes on, he starts talking about his grandmother, and her greatest gift is tolerance, and how she's put up with so much, but all she's just always wanted to do was give. And it's very sweet, but she ends up getting killed by a drunk driver, and she didn't die right away. She was taken to the hospital, and towards the very end, her very last words were "forgive him," which is very powerful. It just shows the kind of person that she was, and that she cares for them, and that she just wants to be at peace with everything. Chapter 23 is called Wake, and it's pretty much the summarization of Junior's grandmother's funeral. At this funeral, there was over 2,000 people that showed up, white people and native people from their reservation and other reservations in the area came to pay their respects. It was so huge, the funeral was so big, it actually had to be moved to a football field to accommodate for all the people. One of the big things Junior talked about right as his funeral was happening is that after his grandmother passed away, everyone on the res quit bullying him, pushing him, calling him mean names. Everyone just kind of respected that he was grieving and just gave him his space, which was nice. Now at the funeral, a wealthy man showed up by the name of Ted. Ted was a billionaire who likes to collect Indian artifacts, and he claims that he had an old powwow dance outfit that was he claimed was grandmother's spirits. And he goes into the story of like how he came about getting this outfit, and that he figures that it was stolen, and he still bought it anyway, and he wanted to do what was right and return it. When it was brought up to Junior's mom, she said that there's no way that this was her mom's, because she wasn't a dancer. She just loved going to the powwows. And they are looking closer into the artwork and realize that there's no way that this could have been from their tribe. They think it was probably Sioux or a different type of tribe. And he kind of just, he ran off because he was very embarrassed with what he just did. And everyone just kind of laughed it off, was all laughing together and having some fun with that. And yeah, that's pretty much the summation of that funeral. Chapter 24 is called Valentine Heart. It starts off with Junior making a homemade Valentine for Penelope, who actually thought it was Valentine's Day. A couple days later, Junior's dad's best friend Eugene was shot in the face by his good friend Bobby. Both of them were very drunk, and they believed that they were fighting over a bottle of wine. Bobby ended up going to jail, and he actually hung himself over the guilt he had for what he did. Junior started blaming himself for all the deaths, and was angry at God and angry at Jesus, and just felt like the whole world was mocking him. Junior missed school for anywhere between a minimum 15 to 20-ish days, and at that point Miss Jeremy made a snide remark about him missing so much class. After that had happened, Junior's friend Gordy stood up and dropped a book on the floor in protest, and slowly every single other person in the class did the exact same thing. And then right after they finished dropping the book, they all walked out, leaving Junior in the room. At that point, Junior determined there are two types of people in the world: those who are assholes and those who are not. Now, he said this directly to Miss Jeremy, and I think it's an important thing to bring up because this whole book talks about developing the difference between whites and natives. And I think at that point it was a huge turning point in how Junior has seen people. And after that, Junior realized life isn't as bad and he needs to start thinking of things that make him happy. So he started making lists of everything that gave him joy. It goes from music, types of books, different things like that, different things that helped brought him happiness.
In chapter 25, in Like a Lion, Junior becomes a freshman starter on a varsity basketball team, which is a really big deal considering he came from a reservation that didn't have a very good team. And one of the quotes I remember him saying from the book is, "They needed me to be good, they expected me to be good, and so I became good." And I think that as teachers, if we expect more out of our students, they'll perform better. And this is the case for Junior because as soon as he moved to Reardon, his new school, he became a better basketball player than he had been before. And as his team started winning more, the people in the town started comparing the players to former players and their legacies, but they never compared him to anyone. So one of his goals that he had wanted was for people to compare future players to him. And he really felt like he wanted to get revenge against his old teammates in his reservation because of how they treated him at the first game they played against each other. And in an interview, he said that the second game they were going to play against each other was going to change his life. It was a very big deal, and it really was a big deal to him because he ended up being a guard against Rowdy, and usually he was a shooter because he's really good at being a shooter, but his coach thought he should be a guard against Rowdy and ended up shutting him out within the first few seconds of the game, and Reardon ended up winning the game and went on to be number 1 during regular season, but they did lose during the playoffs. But Welpinit never really recovered from that loss against Reardon, and Junior felt pretty guilty about it because he knew a lot of the kids came to the game either hungry or knew they were going to be beaten after the game because they lost. So it was a win and lose situation for him during this game. Chapter 26, Rowdy and I have a long and serious discussion about basketball. It's pretty brief, it's not very long. Pretty much Junior emails Rowdy saying that he feels very sorry for beating them during the second game and that their season went really poorly after losing to them. And Rowdy actually responds saying we'll beat you next year, and calls him some vulgar language, but Junior actually sees some friendliness within this email, and it's the first sign of friendliness that Rowdy has shown towards Junior since Junior has left the reservation. So it actually makes him pretty happy with the response he got from this email. Chapter 27, because Russian guys are not always geniuses, is a very big chapter for Junior. He starts it off by saying about 90% of Indian deaths are due to alcoholism and alcohol. And this is a really good segue into the topic of the chapter because in this chapter, his sister actually dies, and we find out that it was due to alcohol, and her and her husband threw a party at their trailer, and somebody decided to use a hot plate but forgot to turn it off. So his sister and her husband ended up falling asleep and were too drunk to wake up, and so they burned alive in the fire. And when Junior found out, he didn't actually cry. He started laughing hysterically. And once arriving home, his mother pretty much just held him in his arm or in her arms and was just very, very upset about it and ended up starting to slap him in the face. Eventually, she made him promise to never drink alcohol because she was tired of seeing people they loved die. At his sister's funeral, Junior started to feel overwhelmed by it, so he ran away and ended up finding Rowdy in the forest crying, and he confronted him about the crying, and Rowdy denied it and ended up getting mad and tried to punch him, but he missed, and Rowdy told Junior that he blames his sister's death on Junior because if Junior hadn't left the reservation to go to Rearden, then his sister would have never had the courage to leave the reservation and marry a stranger, pretty much. And so that made Junior feel pretty bad about himself, and he did start crying from that. And he decided the next day that instead of sitting at home and with everyone and they were all drinking, he was going to go to school. And when he arrived at school, everyone was really supportive of him, which was not really familiar to him because when he first arrived, nobody treated him with respect or anything like that. So it made him feel pretty good to see that everyone was supporting him and helping him through this hard time he was going through.
So, chapter 8 was called Remembering, and in this chapter, it's Junior realizing a lot of things about himself, a lot of things about his tribe, and a lot of things about his family. It starts off in the chapter when Junior's with his family at the cemetery and they're cleaning off headstones of their loved ones. And it's a day that he had that he really remembers well because he was happy with his family. One of the times that his dad wasn't drunk, he was there, he was around. And also a really big part of the day was when his mom told him that he was proud of him, and he said he would never forget that. But then afterwards, he started thinking about his sister and wanting to get off of the reservation and the sacrifices that he made for that, and he started to cry, which I think is a really important thing to remember because of how upset he was, not just for himself, but for all the people in his tribe, for the drinking that was taking place, how many people would die within the next year or two of alcoholism, which is a really big part of his family. And he realizes he's not only a part of his own tribe, but he's also a big part of just a tribe in general of American immigrants. Just he's a tribe of cartoonists. He's a tribe of certain things within himself, which I think was really important for him to realize and take place. And he did think about it more in depth, and he realized he was going to be okay. He was making sacrifices, and he was doing things that a lot of other people didn't like, including sometimes even his family members. But just like his sister, he knew he needed to get out, and he knew he needed to make a bigger life for himself, and to do that he had to leave. Chapter 29, talking about turtles. I really enjoyed this chapter because personally, growing up in Minnesota, it opens up with the big scene where he paints a really big picture of the amount of trees that there were on the reservation, how beautiful it was, and just thinking about a lot of the land that there is in Minnesota, it reminded me of that. So I could kind of picture it, and that was a really cool experience. Talking about the importance of them being there, just the trees itself, I thought was really cool. And then he goes into the story about how him and Rowdy climbed the biggest tree on the reservation. It was a really hot day. There was no air conditioning, so they decided to go outside and enjoy it. And while on the way, they walked by the lake on the reservation, and they told a really cool story, or interesting story, I should say, about a horse drowning, and then the horse going and then being burned to get rid of the remains. And then a while later, the lake itself caught on fire, and the body of the horse appeared again, and nobody wanted to touch it. Nobody swam in the lake, all of this. And I thought it was a really cool tale because you hear of a lot of those from different tribes and stuff, and I always think it's interesting to hear. And then it goes into how about Junior reminisces of his days at Rearden and is remembering all the people he met and all the things that he did. And it was really cool to hear him talk about just Penelope and everybody that he missed now that he's back for the summer. And I thought it was kind of cool how Rowdy explained the past and how Indians are nomadic and that they moved to different places, and now they aren't. But he was telling Junior how he is nomadic, and he's going to go make something bigger for himself. He's going to move on. He's going to keep moving to make a better life for himself. And you could tell how that touched Junior in a way that made it worth it for him to make all those sacrifices. So I think it was really important for Rowdy to do that, and I think it was a big thing in the book to have someone say that to him.